All right, so the portion of the Bible that we're going to be talking about today is the wisdom literature. The three books that are officially part of the wisdom literature are the books of Job, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes. Esther is not officially part of the wisdom literature, but its view of the world and God's participation in it is similar to that of the wisdom tradition, so that's why it is included. One thing about the wisdom literature is that it takes a very different approach than that of the rest of the Bible. There's not as much mention of the promises to ancestors such as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as well as any mention of Moses in the Exodus. It talks a lot less about God's actions, but more on instruction on how to live a good life. It speaks a lot less on revelations, but more on human experience, on where to find knowledge. And then one thing that these wisdom writers seem to talk a lot about is things will not always work as they should, such as the wicked being successful and the righteous experience suffering.
So first we're going to talk about the book of Job, which tells the story of how bad things can happen to good people, even though they're seen as righteous in the eyes of God. Many scholars believe that this story is fictional, which may come as a surprise to many of us readers. They also believe that Satan is not evil, and that the Satan in this book actually means the accuser in the original language, which is different than the evil one that we know. Throughout the story, we learn that holding God to his word shows faith and isn't a lack of faith, as depicted by Job. At the end of the book, Job receives all that he lost, which many scholars believe was an added ending to make the story more appealing to readers.
The first book I'm going to be talking about is Proverbs. The word proverb is defined as a parable or dark and puzzling saying. That pretty much sums up the entirety of this book. It's not really related to like a storyline or like a specific idea that you're supposed to figure out through characters. It's just sayings that are used as life guidelines, pretty much. So there's no storyline, just verses paired together. The verses may seem random at first, but they're actually, they're sorted by author or by situation. So it does make it a little bit easier to kind of understand why they're put together if you start reading through the book. They're actually context-oriented life sayings though, so not every single verse is going to help in every single situation. There's actually some verses that, although they have a good meaning behind them, they could actually be damaging to a situation. While there's other ones that may not always seem like they're right for every situation, but they can actually really, really help. And it's not like a strict guideline that you have to follow. It's mostly just reasoning that will kind of help you. If you follow it, then it can kind of give you like a better life as it claims, but that's not always the case. It does depend a lot on context. The second book I'm going to be talking about is the book of Ecclesiastes. It's claimed to be written by Solomon, but there's no proof of that. At the very beginning, it says that this is a teaching of Solomon's, but a lot of people believe that it was written a few decades after Solomon had actually passed away. So there's no proof of that, but it does kind of reinstate how the teachings are very biblical and very wise, as Solomon was. It's a guide on how to understand life. It's very similar to Proverbs, but it's more of a way on understanding life rather than a guideline that you have to follow to live the best life. It's known as having a very bleak view on life, as it has the claim that God has predetermined everything. So no matter what you want to do or how you want your life to play out, it all depends on how God wants it to play out, which some people can see as kind of a depressing view, that you don't have control over your own life, but it is very informational. And then it ends with the author saying, following God is our duty. This may have been added years after the book was initially written, because it does kind of show a more positive end to a book that's more depressing, but it definitely gives a very good understanding of what we're supposed to do as Christians and how we're supposed to live our lives.
All right, so the book of the Bible I'm going to be talking about now is the book of Esther. One thing about the book of Esther is that it actually never mentions God, and it doesn't mention any of the ancestors either, such as Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, and it mainly focuses on belief in divine providence and justice. So this story is set in Susa in the 3rd or 2nd century. It starts out by Ahasuerus, who was the emperor at the time, exiling his wife because she had publicly disobeyed him. So after this, the emperor decided to hold a competition to see who would become the next queen. Esther becomes the next queen. But one thing about it, though, is that no one knew that she was Jewish. So Haman, who was one of the emperor's top officials, tries to have a decree to have all the Jews killed. Esther hears about this, and she decides that she has to go to the king and tell him about it. So once Esther tells the king about it, the emperor is furious, and he has Haman hung immediately. After this, Mordecai, who is Esther's foster parent, takes Haman's place and becomes the next top official.
In conclusion, throughout all the wisdom literature, we learn that life is not always as it should be. There are no simple answers, but righteous living often brings us blessing. Ultimately, the authors of the wisdom literature want to instill in us that to remain confident in the justice and mercy of God.